Alright, so we're going to get started with CSS tonight. Next week we'll go into it in a little more detail. It'll be actually the new stuff as of CSS3, which is the latest standard. Everything we see here tonight is actually available in CSS2 as well, and then we'll see some new stuff next week. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And the whole purpose behind cascading style sheets is to just basically create a global setting, so that you don't have to, when you're doing on a, we'll see how that works, but if you have a situation where you want to say that every time you put something in a H1, which is a very high font heading, that you want it to be in blue, and that's your standard, and you always want it to be that way, and instead of having to redo that every time, you can use a cascading style sheet that will set it. And there's actually a couple of different ways of doing that. So this is sets a standard to use, and it will be the default behavior and format of any page that uses that style sheet. And there's all kinds of different things you can set. We'll look at it. You choose commonly to set color, font size, any type of thickness of borders and padding and things like that. It also separates content from the presentation. So, we'll look at some of the different types of styles, and the most easiest one to do, I don't know if it's the easiest, but the easiest in the sense that it's right there at the time, is something called an inline style. Embedded styles, external, I'm not sure where it says, linking to external style sheets. Also handling conflicts between styles. So you can have multiple style sheets and they can conflict each other, so we'll talk about that. Positioning, absolute positioning with something called a z-index versus relative positioning. The default positioning for web pages is relative, but absolute positioning has a lot of benefits to it, and it's actually the type of positioning that most GUI applications use. So particularly when you're trying to get a Web 2.0 app to behave more like a Windows type application, you generally have to use absolute positioning. Talk about backgrounds and background pictures and colors and things like that, how you can set that. Element dimensions, something called the box model and how the text flow works. Different media types like printers. Also something called readers for the blind. Very important issue. And drop-down menus, how you can use CSS to implement a drop-down menu, which is pretty cool. And then we'll talk about some other things as well. A few other loose ends. So Cascading Style Sheets 3, which is the latest version of it, is used to specify the presentation of elements separately from the structure of the document. There is a validator there you can use online at the w3.org, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. That's their website. And they have some nice tools, not only for CSS, but also for HTML as well. And we'll see some examples in a moment, but one of them is the inline example, which is declares a style inline, which would mean embedded right into the HTML tag. Generally not a good way to do it, because part of the purpose of CSS is to separate the data from the format. So if you do it inline, you're actually violating that rule. So, but inline is the way it was essentially originally done, and to this day, you still see a lot of stuff done inline. Although, again, generally not considered a good idea to do it inline. You can, but just not a good idea. Right. So just like this little tip here says, they don't truly separate presentation from content. That's why we don't like to do it. And then also the inline only applies to that one tag. It doesn't apply beyond that. So embedded style sheets at least will let you which will be the next one we'll look at, will separate the content, and they will apply to any tag of that type on the entire page. But really, the best type of style sheets to use are what they call external style sheets, which is where all your formatting definitions are done in a separate file and they're included page. That allows you to use that style sheet anywhere. And we'll look at them later on. And those are generally the better ones to use. Okay. So in this first example, which I should have, and this should be an example, we'll go through it a little bit further. This would be an example of an embedded. And where you know it's inline, excuse me. Right here in the tag, the P tag, we have something that says style equals, and then in double quotes, it's got some different formatting information. So, for example, here this says font size 20, and that will apply only to that P tag. And then the next thing you see is font size 20, colored deep sky blue, which means the font sizes in both these P tags will be 20, but one of them, the last one, will have a deep blue color. And then finally, these other tags up here that don't have any styles will be whatever the default happens to be. And this is what you get. And if we look at the one here, we get to see the same thing. So we can see that this one had no style at all, so just went with the default. This one and the third one were 20, and the last one had that color, that deep blue color. Okay, so Mark Zuckerberg, his stock is doing horribly, selling at half its strike price. Was quoted saying, HTML5 for Facebook mobile app was a mistake. I just thought it was interesting since HTML5 is supposed to be good for mobile. Well, everyone is promoting HTML5 for mobile. I'm not sure what the problem with using something other than HTML5 is. You're going to have to maintain two different code bases, as we would call it. You're going to have to, if you don't do it in HTML5, then you have to do it in both Objective-C and Java. It's your only options, because Apple uses Objective-C, and almost everyone else uses Java. So, he's saying it's a mistake. Well, I mean, if Facebook wants to maintain two different code bases, that's fine. They rebuilt it in Objective-C. I would have thought they would have written it originally in Objective-C, actually, because Objective-C was Apple's standard, and then they started promoting HTML5. It's too slow in HTML5. That is probably a problem you would have with HTML5. It's not a native app. A lot depends upon how serious the app is to you. If it's that critical, then you're going to maintain two different code bases. But for someone where the mobile app isn't that important of a app for them, they'll probably do it in HTML5 because that allows them to have just one code base, which a lot of people like. So, the real problem is that Apple will not support Java, and no one else is using Objective-C. No one else will use Objective-C. So what do? If you don't do it in HTML5, your only other option is to have two code bases, and those two code bases are Objective-C and Java. So that's really the only other option. You're right on HTML5 on browsers for computers, desktop computers, your standard browsers. That's true. But if you look at Safari, mobile Safari, and mobile Chrome that are used on their respective browsers, actually HTML is pretty standard between Apple and Google. Their mobile editions, anyway. They seem to be more interested in getting their mobile editions standardized than anything else. I think probably most developers would prefer that Apple just support Java, um, because that's what everyone else uses, including Google. Yeah. Supposedly, there's an HTML5 to Objective-C compiler. The other problem with Objective-C is that you have to get it. You have to pay Apple to put it on their iPad, their store, the iStore. Um, and there's no guarantee that Apple will even put it on their store. So if you do it in HTML5, there's no issues with having to get Apple to approve the app. People can simply run it off of your website. And my understanding was that there was going to be an HTML5 to Objective-C compiler that you could use if the app seemed like it was popular and Apple was willing to approve it. So there'll probably be more to come on that. But as of right now, I would say you definitely should be. The whole thing is you're probably going to want to create an HTML5 mobile version of anyway, because people may be coming to your site from the internet. So there's probably going to wind up having to do it anyway. If you were to go to Facebook.com from your iPhone, you would probably get a mobile HTML5 version of Facebook. So you're likely to have to do HTML5 anyway. Looking at some of the stuff here, we see that there's a color property which we used, and we set the color deep blue based on that. So that's one of the properties you get. You can either type in the color deep blue like we did in some of these cases. Okay, actually this thing here is actually using what they call a hexadecimal. All colors are stored actually as hexadecimal. You can give literals very often that as well, that those literals are basically just translated into the hexadecimal, because the hexadecimal is actually the color it uses. If you were to look at any of those programs that allow you to put things in different colors, like paint, for example, might be a one to look at. And let's see, if you want to pick a color, we need to edit colors maybe. If you'll see the numbers you have down here, this winds up being the hexadecimal at some point. See how those numbers all change. It basically shows you the percentages of red, green, and blue, RGB. I mean, basically every color you can think of is made up of some combination of that, of those three numbers. And then there's a hexadecimal equivalent. So you see this here. So you'd have then a hexadecimal equivalent of that. And that's what's actually used and stored. Let's see. You see that you've got right there. So that's 66 is actually hexadecimal for some number. Then 66 again is hexadecimal for some number. Actually, that probably would be 66. And then FF is hexadecimal. That's generally 16 and 16, which would be your hexadecimal equivalent. And that would be blue of some color. Deep blue is what they said it was. Unfortunately, paint here doesn't blue. Let's see what happens if I change these manually. 66 and 66. Okay, we get that color there. And then the other one was FF, which is, I think, 176 is what it would be. And you can see by putting those numbers in there, you get blue, some color of blue. The main issue you have is that you actually have to translate this number into hexadecimal. So the first two would be 66, which would be red. Next one is green, GG, and then FF would be the RGB, black, I believe, right? Blue, rather. So 176. Since it's really a shade of blue, that would be the strongest. And that gives us that, and is that what it actually looks like? That's the question. Is that what it actually looks like when we display it? So that color that's the color right there. Well, actually, the one that's on the web page looks darker to me, but the whole point is that you can, in this thing here, is you can either put a number in here like this, which is again a combination of red, green, and blue. I might be wrong on the FF. I didn't think I would be. I think that should be FF. So F is 16. I don't know if anyone knows how to do hexadecimal math, which is called base 16 math. Sound familiar to anyone? Yes, you do. FF, is that 176? Am I doing that right? The 66 should be 66, because both of those numbers are under 10. I have to split it into two parts. It's been a long time since I've done hexadecimal. FF, no, it probably wouldn't be 170. It wouldn't be 176. It would be 16 times 16 plus 16, right? Wouldn't that be what it is? 16 times 16 plus 16? Let me try that. Oh, you're right. It would be 255. Of course. Duh. You're right. Alright, let's try that. FF, of course it would be 255. Very good. Let's try that again. Okay, so if I come in here, I made a very common mistake in hex math. I took the second F for 16 and multiplied it by 10, and then I added 16 to it. Of course, not even realizing FF, it's always 255. And then I think these should be 66. Okay, that actually looks a lot better. It actually looks a lot closer to it. If you compare that to that, looks a lot closer. Okay, so that is how you do it. Okay. You must be an old mainframe guy. That's how we used to have to do stuff. Okay. So anyway, that's how you figure out the colors. And you can actually type some literal colors in here, and here's a chart actually with them. Of course, blue would be all FF, because it's if it's pure blue, there's no red or green, it's just blue. Black basically means an absence of all colors. And different, combinations of things. Green, it's just 80. I wonder why that wouldn't be FF. 00FF. For green, RGB. Lime looks like it's basically all the FF. Maroon, different colors you have there. So you've got all the different colors. Red, of course, would just be FF. All those colors turned on. Purple is usually also, it's about half red and half green, which makes sense. You've got 80 and 80 for purple. So you can see how that works. Here's a simple chart. And you can play with these numbers all you want to give yourself different shades of different numbers.